Hello, hello. How's it going? I hope you're doing well. And today I want to talk about what is without a doubt the most important thing to consider if you are thinking about using Facebook groups and you're thinking about leveraging a Facebook group in your e-commerce brand. Now, if you haven't been thinking about this, it's something that I definitely encourage you to think about and consider, and maybe it's going to be a right fit for your brand. Recently, there's been a lot of algorithm changes, and I'm not going to kind of get into all the details of it, but Facebook groups for a while now have been favored, right, in the algorithm. We get a lot of new members into our Facebook group that just Facebook suggests it to them, and they might be searching for something and they find some of our groups and then they join. And that's good because it can bring you traffic and awareness. But one of the best parts about having a group, especially for your brand, is it allows you to put into place and practice all the things that we talk about, that I've talked about in the past, right? So positioning yourself as an authority in your space, in your market, really creating bond and community among your prospects, and showing how you can help people get from where they want, where they currently are to where they want to be. You can educate, you can provide value, results in advance, all the things that we need you to do, that I need you to do so that you become a trusted advisor. I don't just want you to fall into the trap of selling stuff, just pitching stuff. You can make some sales, but it's tough to differentiate. I always talk about this pool of sameness, right? And if you just do what everyone else is doing and what all your competition is doing, there's no way to differentiate you. And one of the ways to do that, to start differentiating, to rise above everyone else, right? Take the high road because it's less crowded. And especially in this pool of sameness in e-commerce, there's no barrier to entry. I've talked about this. Literally, with a credit card in your basement, anyone can start a quote unquote brand. To start pulling away from the pack, we need to start thinking about the impact we're having on our customer, and how we're starting to provide more value and do all the things we talk about with your propositions. I've talked a lot about your 5 power propositions, and to be able to bake all that in, it's so much easier to do it if you have a captive audience, right? Like a Facebook group. So I just got done doing a training in our Ecom intensive program. So every once in a while I'll do this. I'll have an idea, and there'll be a lot of questions, and then I'll put a training together. It was supposed to be like one day, but like an hour training, I ended up having like 60 slides. So we're gonna break it up into a few trainings. But I wanted to bring you kind of some insight from the intensive, and kind of some of the main points. So when you are starting this group, there's a lot of things to consider. What you name it, the cover art, the posts that you put in there, what you talk about, how you organize it, right? There's a lot of things you can do and that you want to consider that are really important. But there's one thing that's more important than anything else. If you do nothing else, make sure you get this one thing right. And this is coming from mistakes that I've made. This is like huge mistakes I've made in the past. And every other group that we formed, we've done this. So it's one thing you must do is consider and purposefully influence the initial conditions of your group. What do I mean by initial conditions? Who are the first people in that group? It is critical that you do this. One example I like to use a lot is from like aviation. So an airplane. So imagine an airplane that's pointed, it's in LA and it's pointed to the East Coast. So imagine a map of the United States, and you have an airplane and it's about to take off, and it's going to go to New York City. So it's going to fly from LA to New York City. So it's about to take off and it goes. If the nose of the plane is just 3 degrees tilted, so to the right, so you just tilt the nose of the plane 3 degrees to the right, which is about 6 to 7 feet maximum. Okay. So less than 7 feet, and you just tilt it less than 7 feet down, that plane on the same trajectory ends up in Washington, DC. I mean, just hundreds, if not thousands of miles. I mean, I'm not sure the distances, but it's a huge difference for just less than 7 feet from the initial starting point. Because over time, right, as we travel, it magnifies the little shift. That's what initial conditions are like. That's how important it is. If you it'll influence the trajectory of the growth of your of your group. It'll influence the culture of your group. It'll influence the engagement. It'll influence ultimately the results you get from it. So while there's a ton of things we can talk about tactically what you do, and there's a lot that goes into it, how what you name your group, that's super important. The kind of content you put out, how you position yourself in that group, in that community, all this stuff matters. And if you're an e-commerce brand, I still see this as one of 3 or 4 like super low hanging fruit in your business, in your niche. And these are things, by the way, I've been talking about for like years that still I don't see sellers taking advantage of, and the sellers that do reap the reward of it. Facebook groups is one of them, or building a community is one of them. And groups make it really easy because it's where people are, right? They're already on Facebook. It's a lot easier to build it there. I see a lot of people trying to build their own forums and their own platforms. That's hard to do. It's great if you can do it, because you truly then own you own the attention, you own the audience, but it's extremely challenging. It's very, very difficult to pull off. There's less friction with a group. And I've got a buddy who built a huge subscription-based product using a Facebook group. And I don't know if they ever get into physical products, but they definitely were in the education space. And he built the entire business all on Facebook. I mean, it was massive, like 6 figures a month, and like multiple. And I know that I've had this discussion with him. He's like, it's just less friction just to keep him on the platform. So if I was going to build a community anywhere, I would probably say start with Facebook groups. Maybe one day you can bridge them off. And there's a lot of things to consider when you build that group. And there's a lot of cool tactical things you can do to increase engagement. But hands down, number one, the most important thing are like the initial conditions. So make sure those people that you invite first are your ideal buyer. These are the people that 100%, this is exactly who you reach out to, who you want to buy your product, and who ultimately, maybe they're already the people who have bought your product. That's how you ensure that they actually are your ideal buyer. One of the first things we do, whether, in anything we do with clients or students or any of our programs, the first thing we do is we define and establish our buyer persona. We know exactly who we're speaking to. If you speak to everyone, you speak to no one. And if you create a community, quote unquote, that's just anyone, that's what you're going to get, is anyone. And when anyone comes in, they're going to feel like anyone belongs here. What we want to do is we want to magnetically attract the right people. So initial conditions will set the foundation for your page, for your group, and for that community. So I highly recommend you try it and you consider doing this. It takes time. This is not a quick thing that like, boom, it just hits and, you just start reaping benefits of having this community and people start buying your stuff. In fact, you have to wait for what I call, kind of the critical mass of your group, where it seems like nothing is happening. And then you'll get this pop where all of a sudden there's engagement or there's interest or potentially there's sales that start developing from it. But it takes time to get there. So it is not an overnight thing. And like all things, anything kind of worth doing is just going to take time. But when you start, definitely make sure initial conditions are set. And as you might imagine, this applies to other parts of business and other parts of life. Be aware of initial conditions. This is critical that we're mindful of it, because it just sets that trajectory. What could be here, kind of flat, if we just kind of tip the nose this way, with initial conditions being a little bit, at a different direction or a little bit at a better rate of growth, right? And now we launch, it just takes off like this. Literally what we do in those first steps can influence what happens 6 months and a year from now. And the number one thing that will influence how your group develops and what the results are that you get from that group will be your initial condition. So make sure you get your ideal buyer in there, start with your buyers if you have them, and then expand out from there. And you'll be much, much happier. Trust me, this is from experience. You'll be much happier with where the group ends up. And it could be an incredible asset and a perpetually growing asset for you in your business. It could generate a lot of sales, and more than anything, position you as a trusted advisor. So people actually want to do business with you because they know that you have their best interest in mind, which, by the way, at the end of the day is a way better way to run a business than just like, hey, you want to buy my stuff? You can make some sales, but it's a lot better if you do it if you do it the other way. Trust me. So go get it done. watch your initial conditions. And if you are going to do a group, watch out who you first invite. And in a lot of things, look for initial conditions. It's super important. And I will see you next time. All right. Bye.